Okay, welcome to the Truth Testosterone podcast. My name's Doug Suley. I'm here with Joe Sigurdson and Dr. Arne Rubinstein of the Rites of Passage Institute, ritesofpassageinstitute.org. And we're here to talk about initiation and healthy masculinity. And we're going to kick it off, Arne, with you giving us a little bit of the history of your organization, how you got it going. Welcome, and thank you very, very much for being here with us today.
Thank you. Nice to be here on your first podcast. That's exciting. I feel very honored. I mean, look, it's a story. These things are always a story. I reckon I had a tricky childhood and, I was always struggling and not happy, and became a doctor, worked in emergency medicine for 15 years, and also worked in family practice. And two things I really saw was that in family practice, the older men were saying if they had their time again, they would have lived their lives differently. And in emergency medicine, seeing that we were just getting so many boys coming into the emergency department, having done the stupidest thing they could in a car, or jumping out of off a cliff, or getting into a fight, or, just anything. And I was like, what's going on here? And I sort of realized that there was a connection between what the young men were doing and the older men. And I went to my first men's retreat in 1993, and that was a life-changing event for me. And I saw that basically all the men were struggling with 5 core issues, and they all had 3, 4, or 5 of these issues. And the first one was not having been recognized or acknowledged properly by their fathers. The second one was, what am I supposed to be doing with my life? The third one was, when am I going to feel like a man rather than a boy in a man's body? The fourth one was, how do I be in a relationship in a healthy way? What does that even mean? I certainly haven't had any education there. And the fifth one was, if I'm a father, how do I be a good father? And that was the first time when I heard someone say, if there'd been something when we were teenagers, our lives could have been so different. And I heard the word about rites of passage. And then a little while later, we ran a program for 27 boys and men out in the bush for 3 days. And we basically made it up as we went. And something profound happened. I saw the incredible impact of spending time with boys in nature, sharing stories, talking about challenges, all of these different things. So I started studying rites of passage all over the world and traveling around and setting up programs here locally. And then 7 years later, in 2000, I left my medical practice and set up what was called the Pathways Foundation to run rites of passage all over Australia. And we got 8 places going around Australia with 42 camps a year. And I left that in 2009. And then a couple of years later, I set up the Rites of Passage Institute. And now our aim is to make rites of passage mainstream again, so that every boy and every girl, we'll talk more about boys this time, but that every child has an opportunity to go through a healthy rite of passage. Because the truth is, every child's going to go through a rite of passage, and if we don't create something healthy for them, the danger is that they create their own, which can be potentially disastrous and have an impact for the rest of their lives. So
let's talk about that. They're going to create it on their own. So what is the need for the men like us, the elders? What is the need that this young person has for people like us?
Well, there's a fundamental shift in the thinking, the psychology of a boy to a man. And men hopefully know that. And someone needs to shepherd them through this process from how a boy thinks, which is it's all about me, I'm the center of the universe, I want a mother, all that stuff, to a healthy man, which is I'm actually part of a community, and I have responsibility in the community. And if I have power, that means I can do more good. And I have to be able to stand with my emotions. If I get angry, I'm allowed to be angry, but I'm not allowed to hit someone or abuse someone. And I'm not looking for a mother, I'm looking for a healthy relationship. And I have a huge concern that we live in a world that's run by boys who think about themselves and don't take responsibility for their actions and can never be wrong, think it's okay to lie, you know. And
boys in men's bodies.
That's right. all of that.
Yeah.
So, and the boys can't take them through it themselves. And we see that when they try to, and there's the things that happen in fraternity houses and hazing and all of those things.
Yeah.
That's boys trying to create it with each other. And what we need older men who can hold the space and support boys through the transition, through the rite of passage from boy to young man.
You know, I remember I think it was more Gillette, King Lever Warrior Magician, and they're
Yeah.
talking about the adolescent warrior being the hero, and that guy needs an authentic experience as the hero to transcend that hero status to the warrior. He needs it for the parade, for the applause. But
Yeah.
once that part of him has been satisfied, now he just does it because it's the right thing to do. You know, he does it because it takes that kind of tenacity, it takes that kind of commitment, that kind of grit to get done what needs to get done. And you don't need a parade or applause to do it. You do it because it's the right thing to do as a man.
Men do it because it's the right thing to do.
Right. So
Yeah.
creating and holding space for that to occur naturally instead of basically what these young guys are getting now is a didactic, I'm going to teach you how to do this message.
Or nothing. And they do it themselves by getting drunk or crashing their car or jumping off something that's too high to jump off or, you know, or any of those things.
Well, I just know that, I don't know who, I think it was Michael Mead. Every time a young man takes a risk, he's begging for initiation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and if we're not there to give it to them, they'll do it themselves.
So what does that process look like?
And by the way, there's a saying that it takes a woman to birth a boy and it takes men to birth the man.
Yeah.
So the first thing, it takes men. And then what was really interesting for me when I looked at rites of passage all over the world is, first of all, they all did it. Every community, every traditional Indigenous community would create a rite of passage for their boys. And they didn't have workshops where they all got together and talked about it. They just had thousands of generations of human behavior to observe. And they all realized if you don't do something once they hit puberty, it's going to be a disaster. We cannot have boys running our community. So they all recognized it. And then they all came to a similar conclusion that you have to take them away for a period of time. You have to put them through a process to create a transformation, which I'll come back to. And then you have to integrate them back into the community so that they know they're young men and the community knows they're young men, and they step up into the responsibility of being a young man and also get the privileges. Our problem when we don't do it is they want the privileges, by the way, but they don't take the responsibility.
Yeah.
That's the problem. So there was always those three stages of a separation, a transformation, and a return, an integration. And my work has been around, what do you actually have to do to create that transformation? How do you change? You've got them there. You've taken them away from their normal day-to-day life. You've turned their phones off. You got them for 3 days, 5 days, a month. What do you do to actually create the transformation? And what I've identified is that the 4 things that are always contained in a transformation are sharing of stories. Stories are a big one. Stories are used if you get the community sharing stories, their own stories with each other. That is the best way of building community, and that creates sense of belonging and everything, which is so important. When you get elders sharing stories with the young ones, not telling them how to live their lives, but sharing their stories, including what went well and when they, you know, mucked up, that's how you pass on wisdom and knowledge. And then the third type of stories is when you use myths and ancient stories that have multiple, you know, many messages within them. So stories are always present. There's always a challenge or an ordeal. They need something. And once again, if we don't create it, they create their own. And that's what we see the most often, because that's the external thing. But the internal happens through the stories, appropriate challenge, creating a vision for the future. What sort of young man do I want to become? What am I going to let go of from my childhood? And then the fourth one is recognizing that every boy that we put through a rite of passage is different and unique, and they all have their own gifts, talents, genius, and spirit. And it's our role as older men to recognize for those boys that we see those gifts. I mean, ideally it's their father, but often their father can't do that. But older men, and hopefully including the father, need to recognize and name the gifts, talents, genius, and spirit that they see in the boy. And when we do those things, when we share stories, create an appropriate challenge, help them make a vision and recognize their essence, their genius and their spirit, we will create a transformation. Then we just need to integrate them back into a community that doesn't even know about this stuff.
Right, right.
That's it in a nutshell.
How do you go about integrating the process into the community, into that young person's life?
Yeah, well, integration is so important. It's actually the most important stage in many ways of all, because that's what they're going to take into their lives when they come back. And often it's not done at all, or it's done badly. And the greater the impact of the transformation, the more powerful. If it's not integrated, the greater the potential for wounding and disappointment in that young man. So we actually have a responsibility to do the integration as well as we can. And there are multiple ways that we do it. And for us, that includes our programs. Whenever we can, we get the boy's father or a male mentor to come with the boy, because then he has a support person and he has someone who he will go home with who's also been through a process. It's actually a rite of passage for the man as well. So that's one thing that we do. All of our programs are father, son, or mentor. We also, you over there have the opportunity to run groups afterwards. So I would suggest that if anybody's running a program, it's not just the camp. There's a commitment to attend 5, 10 weekly or monthly groups, whether it's in person or online, so that we can check in and we can talk about how it's going and where they need help and where they need support. We invite the young men who've been on our programs to come back as returning young men. We send home a booklet to the parents, which has a series of exercises that they do once a week for a month with their sons, including learning how to do a check-in together, talking about privileges and responsibility, creating a vision for how they want their relationship to be in the future. Anything like that we can create to keep contact and to keep it going is extremely important and extremely useful.
How does that line up with Boys to Men, Joe?
Oh yeah, yeah. You're right. Anyone can have a big bride. We can give them a big weekend, but if there's no follow up or no follow through, it's damaging. You called it, Arne. In fact, we got to the point where we were having people from around the country wanting to bring or send their sons for a weekend, but not be a part of the community that we do. And we started when we saw the damage we were doing by not having that follow-up, by having these guys get a crystal clear vision of who they wanted to be and how they were going to get there, and then with no follow-up, it was damaging. So, of course, we have our school groups where we're sitting with the guys every week, identifying the blocks, the beliefs, the issues, the traumas, and then they come up and they have their rites of passage where they get the separation. They do the descent. They go through the ordeal. They have to find some resolution around some of the traumas and some of the blocks and beliefs and issues that were projected or manifested, and with a commitment to move through them and action steps. And we actually call that the road mapping process, where we write all that down. And then they've literally told us what they've got to do to be the men they want to be, and then they get the copy of that. We get to come back into group and ask them, where are you with this? Have you called your dad yet?
Brilliant.
Yeah. So
it's brilliant. And we also, all of these things, and the more we can share these ideas.
Yeah.
So we have a big celebration when they come home, and we have family members and friends and as many people as we can there when we get back. And each of the boys or each of the young men gets presented, a few words get said about him, and then each of them steps forward and says something that they are going to change in their lives that would be good for them or good for others as a result of the program they've just been through. And it's like, it's huge because the parents get to see not only have their sons been seen,
Yeah.
but also their sons are going to change, and they make the things they say they're going to do are profound.
Unbelievable.
Like, I'm going to try more new things rather than always saying no.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop arguing and just try and listen to what someone's telling me. They're not saying, I'm going to tidy my room.
No.
They're actually saying really profound, deep things. So we can never do enough integration, is what I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you, man. I'm with you. Gosh.
And I remember sitting with you, Joe, when I was there in would have been San Diego, I reckon, and you had a group of difficult, we could say, young men who came from all sorts of backgrounds, and gave them pizza, and they had the option to share, and some of them didn't share, and one boy just held the stick and cried. Another one shared, and he said that's the first time he shared in the 3 months he's been coming here. Just giving our young men this opportunity to speak their truth and be listened to is so valuable. It's extraordinary.
All they need is permission. And if we as men
and safety.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, permission and safety. And that's what I was going to say. And if we as men can model what that permission looks like by sharing our stories and talking about what happened to us, how we felt, the choice we made, the price we paid, and really humanize and create that liminal space for them to step in and do the same thing. That's magic happens, man. When we go in with the right intentions, magic happens for sure.
Yeah. We actually say that there are 3 things that they need, amongst others, but 3 key things a young man needs to thrive. One is a healthy sense of belonging. And it's got to be a healthy sense of belonging, because if they can't find somewhere healthy to belong to, they would rather belong somewhere unhealthy than nowhere at all.
Yeah.
The second is they need, life skills for today, things like resilience and emotional intelligence and adaptability. And the third thing they need is to go through a healthy rite of passage rather than create their own. So if we can do those things, we're going to give these boys a way better chance than if they have they belong to an unhealthy group who are doing bad things. They don't have basic skills, and they're going through disastrously unhealthy rites of passage. I look at it that life for a boy or a man is like a staircase, and each step represents another stage of life, from child to young adult. People have different staircases, but leaving home, getting into a relationship, if you have a child, becoming a parent, becoming an elder. So there are all these stages. And rites of passage were not just created for boys becoming young men. They were actually created for all of these different stages. And the framework of separation, transformation, and integration with the elements in transformation are relevant at all of these stages. They're just done differently. Like, you wouldn't put a 70-year-old through the same challenge that you put a 15-year-old. A 15-year-old needs a physical challenge. A 70-year-old, or I'm 61, our challenges are much more psychological, emotional, spiritual.
Yeah.
But the challenges nonetheless as we move through the stages. Now, what's happened is because of the lack of rites of passage, this staircase, we've just had a complete breakdown, and we have children acting like babies, teenagers acting like children, young men acting like teenagers, elders still trying to pretend they're young men and holding down the young so that they can still feel powerful. The whole thing's not working. And when we lose the mentoring, when we lose the connection between the elders and the young, there's a saying that grandparents and grandchildren have a special bond because they have a common enemy. And the mentoring is not only good for the young because they get seen by the elders, and the elders have time for them, and that's what they need because their parents are busy and often a bit stressed, but the elders see them and just have as much time as they need. The elders also miss out because when the young are around the elders, the elders have a purpose and they also get energy. And when you take the young out, the young miss out and the elders also miss out. So they end up leaving and going off, traveling around in their RVs or playing golf or whatever. and doing time.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the whole staircase is actually related to every other part of the staircase. And when we lose elders, the whole staircase doesn't work properly. When the young don't go through their rites of passage and they stay in that boy behavior throughout life, or until something bad happens to them when their wife leaves them, or they get sacked from work, or they have a car accident or an illness, and then they go, oh my God, what have I done with my life? You know, the whole system is out of whack. And the other thing they say is the elders have a role keeping the ones in the middle in check. So it's not, the elders shouldn't be running the place, but they should be mentoring and keeping in check the ones in the middle. And when they don't have it, the ones in the middle are dangerous. They become megalomaniacs and just, it becomes all about them and I want all the power. So there's a whole thing. And when we start creating healthy rites of passage, it benefits everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do these stairs relate to these individual traumas? So let's say, like you say, the guy got canned from work or got divorced. If there isn't this connection between, so there has to be this stair here that's experienced some sort of a trauma that's similar, right? That has the ability to connect with that.
Yeah. Well, there are two actually elements to the rite of passage concept. One is that we go up a staircase. The other is that we have in our lives a spiral downwards. And that spiral has things contained within it like disappointment, broken dreams, grief, loss of loved ones, aging, any of those things. And we all experience those grief cycles. And rites of passage are not only used to help us move through the stages up, but they're also there to help us manage the difficult times. You know, you think of how many people have lost a loved one, and sometimes it's done really beautifully and respectfully. And yes, it's incredibly sad, but we grow and we become better people for it. Other people, someone dies, it's never talked about. It's shut down, back at work on Monday, and it just lives inside. And then they start drinking and having dreams, and stuff comes up 10, 20 years later. So rites of passage are used for that.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I'll say is that in the rite of passage, we go into a different space. We go in something called liminal space. And in liminal space, our psyche's open and we can see our core beliefs and values and our stories. And we actually get an opportunity to see that some parts of our stories were put in when we were much younger, maybe 5, 10, 15 years old. And some of those parts just don't make sense anymore, but they're still running our lives.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I got told when I was 7 years old that I can't sing. And I still believe that. And that's a shame because I would love to sing and I have a good ear for music, but it got into my psyche. And unfortunately, when people get abused and trauma lives in there, when we're in the rite of passage space, when we're in liminal space, we have an opportunity for that period of time to move some of these things that are in out and to bring in some new ones. So all of a sudden we realize that a rite of passage helps us move up the staircase, can help us deal with difficult times, and also helps us review and evaluate some of the parts of our belief system and even change it. And that's what you're talking about, Joe, when you're with these young guys and they're dealing with traumas and events that are happening and they're doing things that they've always done, even if they're not the right things for them. And they have that opportunity to change that and make commitments to deal with it differently. And when that's done well, as you're talking about, they go home and they can actually change things. They have a period of time, and if they integrate well, they can change. And that changes the course of their lives.
You know, and you know, the men are just as hungry for this as the boys, because when the men are witnessing this courageous young man addressing, you know, some of the traumas that they've had to survive, and navigating that with a strategy that's going to get him freedom on the other side. And I watch men watching these boys, and I just see the transformation, that liminal space that has
Correct.
opened up in them as well. And that's where
It's everyone.
change happens, right?
Yeah.
And so
Everyone.
it's and so like we run these circles, and the men that are committed to supporting these groups for free are there for themselves because of what they take away from the circles by being maybe the asset they needed as a young man for somebody else, and there's that symbiotic healing for them as well as for the boys.
Correct.
I think that that's a part of mentoring too, is achieving mastery. So when we give of ourselves into these things, we're still continuing to build on our own work. And I believe that we stay in the work, and I think sometimes, for me, for our own personal growth. You know what I'm saying? Like the more
Absolutely.
it's the 10,000 hours thing, because it never ends. I mean, I think we gift ourselves is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Arne, I think this is good. Like I mean, this is everything that I wanted to hear, and it blesses me and affirms me in really good ways because I have so much love and admiration and respect for you, and I love being on this parallel journey in these parallel universes with you. So thank you.
My pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
Yeah, yeah. And Doug, Doug is an OG, man. He was at the kitchen table in 1996 manifesting this vision of Boys to Men. So he's been with us from the very beginning.
Thanks for being with us, and like to ask a huge favor. If you would click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with your friends. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay,
All right,
man.
guys.
Beautiful. All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you, Arne.
Hello.
Thank you, Doug. Beautiful.
Okay.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good night.